We'll try again. We had a little bit of a false start there because of the sound, but hopefully the sound has improved itself now. We'll wait till someone comes online. But anyway, let's get started. We're talking about injury, recovery, and the responsibility you have for that. The unfortunate thing is that we live in a victim mentality world, and so when we get injured, we just think it was bad luck.
Yeah.
Oh, it was just bad luck.
These things happen.
Yeah, it happens.
Part of the sport.
That's right. You know, there's the coaches always have this notion that injury is a stock standard, acceptable, unavoidable part of training, but it's not. And the fact of the matter is, of course, injuries happen. You know, there are certain injuries that are gravity related and things like that, particularly in contact sports and so on. Yeah, that's life. But injuries as a result of poor training is something that really needs to be seriously addressed.
And you mentioned something at the start of our lunchtime training session today at the dojo. You said, you know, an injury can wipe years of great training away.
Indeed.
And future performance away as well. So I thought that was a really valid point, and I'm sure you've seen it and experienced it, and I have too over the years.
It's so important to recognize that you have to take responsibility for your training to avoid injury the best you can. But in actual fact, injuries can ruin careers. They have ruined careers. They've ended careers. In the extreme, injuries can go much further than just ending your career. They can actually end people's lives and things. I did some research, and don't quote me, but if you would look it up, you'd find that I wasn't that far off the mark. I looked into judo in high schools in Japan, and there was something like 176 cases of spinal injury resulting in quadriplegia, paraplegia, or even death in high school in judo. And primarily it had a lot to do with not just poor technique, but poor coaching. Okay, so it's really important as instructors that we take responsibility for being the best coaches we can be, and that also means managing the potential for injury in your school.
Absolutely.
One of the big things I find with injury is poor recovery. Is that a fair call?
And something that Ian King's talked about for years, and if you go and read Tudor Bomper's work in Theory and Methodology of Training or any Eastern European literature and so on, there's a concept of the training effect, which is training plus recovery equals a training effect. And people get sort of, I'm under-recovered or I'm overtrained or whatever it is. It doesn't really matter. The point is that the training plus the recovery is not getting the training effect you want if you're not getting the outcome you want, or if you're getting injured regularly.
I think that's worth repeating, because it's very easy, particularly when you're 19, 20, 21, in your 20s, you should be 10 foot tall and bulletproof, but you're not. And I think one of the things you have to recognize is you're training for life. If I attempted to train as hard now as I did in my early 20s, I'd have no doubt that by now my body would be broken. Even if I try to keep that up in my 40s, 50s, and 60s, you have to recognize that training plus recovery gives you the training effect, and the balance between the amount of training and the amount of recovery changes with time.
Absolutely. Over time, it changes. As a general rule, now there's always exceptions to rules, but as a general rule, the older that we get, the more time we need to recover. The training units have to be done better. I'll say it that way. They need to be more quality training and better recovery. And sometimes that's just longer recovery between sessions. And as we were just chatting about this earlier, a simple thing can be, just because we work on a 7-day cycle in the Western world doesn't mean that our body is ready to go on a 7-day cycle. Fatigue is residual. We carry it with us through the week. So just because it's Monday again doesn't mean you're fresh and it's the start of the week necessarily, particularly as you're aging.
And once again, Mitch keeps dropping these gems, but that's worth repeating. Just because in our consciousness the world that we know rotates around a 7-day cycle. It doesn't mean our body, training and recovery rotate around the same 7-day cycle. Sometimes it might take longer. So it's very, very common. I would say 90% plus of the time, training programs are modeled around the micro cycle of a day and a week. Okay, and there's nothing wrong with that, provided you manage it properly. But you also have to take into account every now and then. I think it's important to just go, yeah, you know what? Today I'm just going to rest. I think that's important. I remember talking to one of the great swim coaches of Australia who trained many Olympic champions, and they were saying that his swimmers would wake up in the morning and they'd get feedback on their heart rate. And if their heart rate was 10 beats above normal, they just roll over and go back to sleep, and they wouldn't train that day, because that was an indication that the body's recovery is not complete.
Heart rate variability tracking, so it's not quite complete. And there was a time that I worked with an AIS sprint kayak unit. This is 20 years ago, and in the mornings we do creatine kinase and urea testing. So it's a little blood test of the finger, and you check their creatine kinase and urea levels, and if they're really high, it means that muscle breakdown and fatigue is still heavily in their body, and their training would be adjusted for that day. So there's different monitoring recovery. Doesn't have to be that technical either. It can be simple things of, do you feel as rested when you wake up? How motivated are you to train? How flexible are you before the start of training? And if you're short and tight and things are stiff, you probably haven't recovered quite enough. So there's your body weight. Is your body weight dropping because you haven't been able to sleep enough and eat enough and rehydrate enough for the next session? So you don't have to get super technical with recovery. There's some very simple things that are equally as powerful.
And in terms of injury, it's very easy to boil down injury into a couple of things. One is poor training, which is driven by poor training habits, which is driven by poor teaching and poor technique. So as an instructor, you don't just have a responsibility to teach well because you want to get good students. You also have a responsibility to teach well so that you prevent or minimize injury in your school. A good technique is done in a certain way because over time it's shown that it is optimal and beneficial to the body. So one of the first causes of injury is that poor training habits, poor technique, and most of that stems from poor teaching and or poor learning. The other thing that is, I think, the major cause of injury is gravity.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it that falling down the wrong way, getting knocked down and hitting your head on the mat or hitting your elbow or landing wrongly because you don't know how to break fall, it's foolishness. If you're a black belt in karate, you don't know how to break fall, you need to go and do some homework, because it's just unacceptable that you fall down and hurt yourself. Okay? I'm thinking most of the injuries I've had over the years are gravity related as well. Twisting your knee when you fall down, you get hit, and when you get hit, if you go unconscious, the gravity is just dead weight hitting down. So you have to keep that in mind as well, that you can learn techniques which minimize injury.
It's so true. And just to add to the point about gravity, Shian, over time, especially if you're in a standing athletic pursuit, which most karate is done on the feet, so your knees, ankles, and hips and spine get compressed over time, especially when you're doing, lots of kicks, lots of jumps, lots of running, lots of kihon, lots of aido kihon, kata, and so on, which are fantastic for the body. But there's also a compressive effect of the joints. As we age, our joints become more dehydrated, our soft tissues become shorter and tighter, and gravity affects us a lot. It's one of the reasons we're taller in the morning if we measure ourselves and before bed, because gravity literally pushes our spinal vertebrae together. So when it comes to the gravity side of things, Shiam, just being on your feet a lot for training can minimize the joint gap. The gap between joints shortens. So between the femur and the shin bones, the patella and fibula, it shortens. The ankle, it shortens. The hip.
Where's the tibia? Is that the shin bone?
Yes.
The tibia is the shin bone,
yes.
Is it?
So, and fibula is on the inside.
Right,
tibia,
okay.
Yeah. So, and then
I knew that. I was just testing.
I hope I got that right. Someone correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. And then the femur, the thigh bone, and the acetabulum in the hip as well, if we don't stretch and loosen things, it can get jammed up in the hip as well. So the effect of gravity isn't just from what Xian talked about when you get knocked out or knocked down or fall funny. It's also like a compound interest effect on our joints training long term that we need to reverse in our supplemental training. So in our own training, we need to do things to reverse that stretching, massage, and so on.
And so my theory that I'm very adamant about is, all this considered, the number one goal of any training session should be remain injury free. Doesn't matter how hard you train, doesn't matter what your goal is. I haven't heard a single argument in the world that can refute that the most important training goal is to remain injury free. Even if you're preparing for a world tournament and you're tapering and you know you've got to do a last session, imagine the difference between an incredible preparation, incredible taper, last session, you don't listen to your intuition, you go too hard, you get injured, or you wind back that one session, you don't quite complete the session you'd set in your head, but you wind back anyway and you don't get injured. What's better? That you've done 1% of 1% of your training less, or you've done 1% of 1% of your training too much, get injured, and there goes your tournament. So the goal of all training for me is, 1, to remain injury free, 2, to be a good partner primarily so that your partner also remains injury free. Being a good partner is making sure that your partner doesn't get injured, but also facilitating their technical improvement. Okay, and that's really, really important.
Absolutely.
One thing that comes to mind too, because I can only speak from the testimony of my own experience, is as you get older, injury and recovery change dramatically. When you're young, you can get a butte injury, and in a week it's fine. But when you get old, you can get a very minor injury, and it can still niggle you 2, 3, 4 weeks later. So as you get older, you have to master the art of injury management much, much better. I think you when you're in your 20s, you've got this much wiggle room.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it.
But as you get older, that wiggle room gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and your ability to manage injury correctly becomes very important. And on that point, often we talk about cold and heat, ice, warmth, but sometimes there's confusion there. Is there a right time for cold and a right time for heat?
Yeah. So when it comes to regular training, I'm a big fan of warming the body up. Hence, the warm up is in any good training program. But you can go a step further, and you can do what is called a passive warm up. So you can use things like knee sleeves, which are like thermoskins or some sort of sleeve on your knees or ankles or wherever it happens to be, to trap heat in the joint. And by trapping that heat in the joint before you start training, before you start warming up for your session, the joint will be more lubricated. There will typically be more blood flow to the joint, which means it gets more nutrients. It's going to feel better as the muscles around that joint fire. There's other things you can do, Xian, which I know you're a big fan of as well, is using liniments, things like Tiger Balm, things like deep heat, things like...
It's one of my favorites, this one here. Zheng Gu Zhui, the Chinese liniment.
I was just about to say Zheng Gu Zhui.
Yeah, you always mention it to me, but that's good too. The Zheng Gu Zhui, that's Chinese, but in Japanese it's sei kosui, which means liniment, water, bone, good, right, proper. So it means, it's a liniment to work on injuries, particularly bone injury and so on like that. That I guess it's an oldie and a goldie from China.
And they're so important to use to prepare our body. And Sean's got another one here.
That's a good one too. This pain away. Where are we there? Oh, there. I love that one too. You can get that one in a rub, but also a spray. It's very good as well. Tiger Balm, the old classic favorites, a beauty.
Yeah, it's fantastic as well.
So there's another one. I'm sorry if I can mention it. The only reason I can't show it to you is because I'll run out. And it's called All Black and Blue. And I think it's one of the best. All Black and Blue. Now, All Black and Blue is a New Zealand product, and I think it's one of the most ingenious products because you have certain ingredients, which are the therapeutic ingredients, then you have a transport system. So, for example, this Zhengu Zhui is very liquid. You can see it's liquid, which means you have to be very careful managing it because it'll drip everywhere. The flip side of that is you look at Tiger Balm, which is like a petroleum jelly based. So it can mean that actually can get too hot. And I've actually used Tiger Balm, and I've had a couple
As your
of times.
pores open up, it gets hot. Yeah.
It gets hot, but also applying it over and over, it's actually broken into blisters.
Yeah, gotcha.
Because it's just too offensive for the skin in the effort to get. Remember, you're trying to get the active ingredients inside. So you have a transport system. Now, the beauty of All Black and Blue, and I think this is ingenious, they use a seaweed gel so that when it's on your skin, it's a jelly. But when you rub it in, it goes to liquid and it absorbs very, very well. Yeah, I think it's one of the best. Mark, yeah, I'm glad that someone else uses it. I just think it's the best thing since sliced bread. The interesting thing is it was developed by a physiotherapist whose husband just happened to have been the very first non-Japanese to train at the Hombu Dojo in Japan. Isn't that
Really?
interesting? Yeah.
Wow.
So that's pharmacists. We can make some amazing recovery creams that are absolutely awesome. Yes, that's
special transport systems.
Yeah. That's right. You can always make your own as well, which a lot of people have done. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, not at all. Yeah. It's fantastic. So using passive heat before you get active, especially if you've got injuries, is so important. It's underdone in training. Most people don't do it, but putting on some sort of liniment or the things that Xian just talked about, then using some sort of knee sleeve, not so much a brace to support the joint, but just a knee sleeve to trap heat into the joint is so underappreciated. I mean, it's free and it's just amazing.
Sir, pick me. I had an epiphany today. Sam at training had a knee sleeve on. Jai said to him, you're all right, you got an injury. He says, yeah, I've got this sleeve on, but I don't know that it helps. And I had an epiphany. I have to admit my ignorance in that I saw knee sleeves primarily as structural support. But in actual fact, I realized, because I've been wearing one for 2 days, that one of the major uses of it is what you just said. It's actually keeping the joint warm. It holds the heat into the joint.
That's right.
You were saying that Ian King has been pushing that for a long time.
For years, yeah, for probably 30 years. He's recommended everyone when they do, especially lower body strength training exercises, so loading the lower body, they wear knee sleeves when they train. And it was like sort of laughed upon for decades. So maybe powerlifters did it a little bit, and Olympic lifters, but that was about it. Whereas if you walk into a gym now, it's a minority, but it is gaining more and more acceptance and traction. And the reason he came to that conclusion is for a passive heat opportunity for the body, because when you load the body, you're going to wear the joints a little bit. You just are through loading. So if we're going to do that, knowing what we're doing, let's put some heat into the joint. Let's get some blood flow there. Let's get some nutrients there, because the joint will fire and it'll protect the tissues of the knee a lot more. Just heat. And that's one of the reasons that we warm up in training, because we want to elevate body temperature, get a sweat up. It's an injury preventative tool that just doesn't get used enough, in my view.
Yeah, I think it's so true. One of the things that I used to do when I was training for tournaments, if I had a bad shin injury or something, is that I would put Tiger Balm on it or liniment on it, and it's so tender. Like when you've really, really cracked your shin and it's too tender to touch. And I'd put the Tiger Balm on and I'd rub it and keep rubbing it until I'd start to pass through the pain barrier and rub it harder and harder and harder and harder to the point where I'm actually pushing away dead, poor blood circulation and accumulating dead cells and so on. I push it really, really hard with this warm liniment, and then I put ice on it. And then I'd repeat that over and over. And I just found tremendous benefit in doing that. Is in that one of the reasons you use ice is to stop the blood flow from accumulating with the the poor.
Is to protect the cells around the injured site, because they're usually not going to get much blood, so you want to shut down their metabolism a little bit.
Yeah, and also to stop the poor blood, the dead blood, the bruising from accumulating.
Yes.
So you put ice on it, and that slows down the blood flow tremendously. But when it's time for the heat, you get that moving, and you move it away, and you stimulate the blood flow. And then once again, depending whether it's a joint and bone and muscle, they're all very different injuries. You need to be managed slightly differently.
And Sharon, that can have what you're discussing, a really nice what's called flushing effect, because ice is what's called a vasoconstrictor, so it narrows and shortens tissues, and heat is a vasodilator. It opens them up. So you get this pump-like effect when you're doing that. And it's the same kind of thing. When I say pump, I'm not like talking bicep curls in the gym. I'm talking a natural pump of blood through the areas that are injured or sore, so that it helps bring more nutrients and more oxygen and more blood flow to those areas as a natural pump type effect. And it's one of the things that people do with hot cold now in these days. They'll go in a sauna and they'll go in an ice bath. And a sauna and an ice bath is a similar kind of vasoconstriction, vasodilation, stimulates the nervous system, but also the soft tissues of the body as well, which is a really good thing.
Yeah, nice. I just noticed that note from Roland talking about it takes a while, especially if you've trained really hard when you're young. It can take a while to accept the reality of old age. I always say that the body is very honest but very treacherous. You can work hard, do your best to maintain a healthy body, but when the body says enough's enough, it'll just snap like that. It doesn't care. So as you get older, you really have to very comfortably and humbly accept the fact that the only way you're going to train with longevity is to look after your body. And this is one thing I find Kyokushin guys aren't particularly good at, because they fight hard and they train hard from the start. But you look at videos of the old Okinawan masters and so on, and some of those guys are late 60s, 70s, 80s, and they're still training, and you have to, as Itosu Anko said in his famous 10 precepts, that you can train for health or you can train for fighting. Both are acceptable. Just don't confuse the two. Just because you're training karate doesn't mean you can fight. Okay. And just because you're training hard to fight doesn't mean your body is necessarily going to be healthy. You have to look after it. Yeah. You have to train with longevity in mind. I think that's pretty important. So what Roland's talking about there is actually a very common dilemma that is faced by a lot of people as they get old. They don't like to admit to the honesty of the body that you're no longer able to do what you're able to do. The perfect example of that is the fight on the weekend with Jake Paul and Mike Tyson. I mean, people can speculate all they want about whether it was fixed or not. I don't care. I honestly don't care. More to the point is I'm just watching Tyson and I'm feeling everything he's going through, because at 58, we all know the old Mike Tyson when he was 20 and he was ba, 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 and he's coming in, he's got this footwork, bang, and he's exploding on people. But in that fight, you see Jake Paul throwing something and it goes boom, and then he goes like that. His reaction timing is not there. The other thing too is when he sees an opening, he didn't have the legs to take advantage of that opening, because when your joints go, when your ankles and your knees and your hips go, there's 60% of your punch power gone. If you can plant your feet and not have to move and throw the punch, you'll always be strong. That's why when you watch the training videos of Tyson hitting the bag, you think, wow, for a 58-year-old, he's still got it. But in the ring, when he's got to cover that gap, one, time it, boom, and then cover the gap and counterpunch, his legs just couldn't take him back inside anymore. So it doesn't matter how hard he can punch. At 58, it's going to be very difficult to cover that gap. Now, you could argue either way that it was rigged. I've seen one video that tried to rationalize it. The crazy thing is the early part of the video, they've sped it up by like 10% or something to make it look like Tyson of the old days, but then they're trying to rationalize the whole idea that it was rigged. I don't care. All I know is that at 58, one, your stamina goes in a flash. It's just not there anymore because you don't have that same ability to recover. And two, you don't have the legs, the knees, the hips, the eye-hand coordination, and the ability to counter. That's it. I think it's very important. That's a perfect example in front of everybody of the effect of aging when it comes to real fighting. And this is why we have to see karate as Budo karate. It's not, realistically, your fighting career ends in the late 20s, early 30s. Well, between 30 and 80 is another 50 years.
Yeah. And something else, Shian, on that is it's a great example of something you've talked about. Solsai talked about as you get older, you lose speed. And he said that he did less makiwara as he got older and did more other things to improve his speed. And Tyson was a good example of that too. He looks incredibly muscular and great physically. And I think you said he's 58. So you can look muscular and have a great looking physique as you get older and age, no doubt about it. But the ability to explode, the ability to have speed, that footwork coordination, that changes as your joint health changes. So to maintain speed and explosiveness and so on is a whole different kettle of fish to maintaining a muscular look as well.
Yeah, and there's another comment by Sensei Mike. I guess if you identify what outcome you're looking for from your training, you construct your training accordingly. Too many injuries too often should tell you something about your training. Exactly. Very good. Not only should you structure your training according to the goals, but also you should look at your training with a view to the outcome on your joints and body. And one of the most common things is, for example, working on certain types of surfaces in the wrong way and the way it can affect your joints. So that's a really good point. Too many injuries too often, you should tell yourself it should tell you something about your training.
It does.
I mean, seriously, if you're getting injured all the time, you either look at it and go, well, really, what am I doing wrong? Or you can look at it and go, yeah, I'm training hard because I've always got an injury and everyone else is just too soft. I mean, it's just idiocy. So that's a really good point. Us Lolito, Luis's student. Us. Mark, this year I shredded my MCL. One of the things that I wasn't prepared for was having to retrain myself to trust.
Stable,
yeah, that's a really important thing because I didn't lose my MCL, but I did damage my ACL and my meniscus. I had 2 meniscus tears, bone-on-bone osteo, 2 bones. And I hear you. What happens is at some stage I threw a front kick. After the first experience that I'd had of a negative outcome of that injury was throwing a front kick and my whole knee just dislocated. So getting to a point where you trust your knee, I have to admit, I'm not even sure that I still trust it. I haven't thrown a hard right power front kick since. So that's a really good point that you make there, Mark. I still, after 11 years, I don't trust the joint. And that's not a bad thing either. I mean, sometimes you need to respect the fact that maybe your joint isn't trustworthy. So, it's like, fool me once.
Shame on you.
On me. On you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I mean, if you injure yourself, well, if you blow a joint, you need to respect the fact that maybe, just maybe, that joint will never be the same again. So you have to measure it. You have to work out to what extent you can take it safely. Very important. Yeah, old age, no place for cowards or dimwits, that's for sure. I find that with age, injuries seem to hurt more and last longer. Yeah, I think you could be right. I don't know about hurting more. I think maybe what's happening is the injury is just deeper.
Yeah, and also our hormone levels are lower as we age, our growth hormone, testosterone, things like that. So it takes longer to recover. We're older, our connective tissues are different. We've had more wear and tear. So that's what happens over time. It's there's a saying in sport, you mentioned it earlier, you can cut a 20-year-old's arm off and it's growing back the next day. Yeah. But if you do it to someone who's 40, 50, 60, you might not get your arm back.
Yeah. You have to respect the fact that the body is treacherous, but it's very honest. But the flip side of that is the mind is very loyal, but very dishonest. Yeah. So we have to respect the fact that our mind will try to convince us that the injury doesn't matter. The mind will try to convince us that we're still as young and capable as we were 40 years ago, because it's very dishonest, but it's very loyal. It wants to protect your ego. Whereas the body just says, nah, sorry, you've injured me, and that's life. So it's very disloyal, but very, very honest.
And it's up to us our bodies are always talking to us. They're always, and sometimes they're screaming at us, i.e. pain, inflammation, discomfort, poor function, and so on. So it's our job to listen to the body. We've got to be responsible for our training and our own health and the outcomes that we get. So we've got to listen to it and go, hang on, what's happening here? Why is it doing this to me? And it's not doing it to us, it's actually doing it for us so that we can make better decisions moving forward.
If there's a third reason for injury, it's the ego and the ability to not let go. And Mark made a good point there. In partner work, I have no problem telling my partner to lighten up or to no throws or whatever. That's the most important thing is in karate, if you're doing impact work, one, you should be able to work with a partner who can up the level when you need to, but also down it when you need to. And as you get older, it's clear that you need to bring that level down. You need to respect the fact that as the body ages, you have to take responsibility for protecting it. And that means saying to your partner, just back off a little bit because I'm not dealing with that. My body's not going to be able to recover. I think that's important. Okay. Beautiful. I think that's a really important issue. If for no other reason on Monday, I injured my knee and I have no idea how. It's just, I think I twisted it, twisted, went the wrong way, and it's pretty painful. So now I'm having to put into practice all these theories that I have. But it's really, really important to recognize that as you get older, like today, I didn't even take the warm-up in the morning class because the whole point of the warm-up is to work all the joints. And when you've got an injury, sometimes you need to rest the joint.
And be a lot longer in getting heat in the joint. The warm-up can be too sudden at 6:30 in the morning.
So. That's right, yeah. I think that's a really important issue. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Sean.
Remember, training effect is the training plus recovery. Recovery needs to be planned into your training just as much as the training itself, and you need to have the confidence to just be able to say, you know what, I'm just going to back it down. Mitch has mentioned the work of Ben Johnson's coach, Charlie Francis. He could stand next to the track with his eyes closed and just listen to the foot pound of his runners and as they run past. And they go, no, that's it for you today. Stop. Because he could hear the difference in their footfall that would tell him that fatigue is starting to set in. It was time. Isn't that amazing? I think that's...
the ground contact time would change or the stride would change and he'd know straight away. And go, no, that's it.
Well, as an instructor, we need to have the confidence to say to our students sometimes, rather than just go, come on, push through it, go harder. You can just go, you know what? Just wind it back today. What's that old saying about he who lives, what is it? He who something or other lives to fight another day, sort of thing. You need to respect that fact. Anyway, thank you. I think that's really important, Mitch. As always, appreciate it very much. Big day today. We've done some good sessions. If you're in the Brisbane Gold Coast area, Britt Mikkelsen is in town next week. Britt Mikkelsen, one of the great BJJ innovators in the world. I mean, his approach to BJJ is probably the most game-changing methodology of anything that I've ever seen. So if you're in town, want to go along, go to my website, budokarate.com, and there's a whole Britt Mikkelsen tour page with the seminar dates and everything like that. Thank you very much, everybody. And once again, if you haven't subscribed, I have no idea why. This is absolutely the best YouTube channel in the world. I don't know why Mr. What's his name? Mr. Beast, why he's got so many. But anyway, we're getting there. We've got 3,900 plus.
Okay. Cool.
So the 4,000th subscriber gets a special thank you. If I was Mr. Beast, I'd send you $250,000. But anyway, I appreciate it very much. We're getting there. Pass the word around. That's the best thing you can do. If you think what we have to offer has any value, then tell your friends in the dojo, go along and subscribe to this one. Appreciate it very much. Look forward to seeing you next week. I might even have Britt online next week. That'd be cool.
That'd be very cool.
Do a bit of an interview. Britt will be in town next Wednesday. In fact, I'll speak to him. Maybe we'll be able to get an interview with Britt Mikkelsen. Thank you.